Throughout the Second World War, and in the conflicts before, it's believed that the Japanese armed forces were responsible for the slaughter of up to 14 million civilians. Their treatment of prisoners of war was shocking and barbaric. There was a huge amount of suffering caused by their war effort. But at the end of the Second World War, there were a number of war crimes trials, which aimed to punish those men who had been responsible for the command of the Japanese military, and a number of these senior figures were executed for their crimes. Even politicians who were said to have been warmongers were condemned, but the Americans were concerned that if these executions were heavily publicised, then the Japanese people would rebel in the occupation zone. But one lesser-known execution took place in June 1947, when a former Admiral of the Navy was taken to the gallows in Guam for his actions and work during World War II. But what is the story of the execution of Admiral Koso Abe? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. On the 24th of March 1892, inside of the Yamagata prefecture in the north of Japan, Koso Abe was born. Little is known about his early life, but like most Japanese boys would, he dreamed of a career inside the military, and he was willing to lay his life down in conflict for the Emperor. He joined the Naval Cadets, and he graduated of the 40th class of the Imperial Japanese Navy Academy in 1912, at the age of 20, and there was little at this time to suggest that Abe would become a senior figure in the Navy. He did not graduate at the top of his class, far from it, and he was middling in his class, finishing 73rd of the 144 cadets. But he then went straight out into service and served as a midshipman on a number of Japanese cruisers, and he then gained a number of promotions, becoming an ensign and a junior non-commissioned officer, and he served on the cruiser, the Izumo. But Koso Abe went back to school and he studied naval artillery and torpedoes, and how to operate them and launch them, but because of this work inside the Navy Academy again, he did not see service and operations during the First World War. In 1918 he became a lieutenant, and then 6 years later a lieutenant commander, before in 1930 he was made a commander. But further promotions came, and he was involved as a gunnery officer on destroyers and cruisers in the 1930s, but on the 15th of November 1935 he was given his first command of a ship, a cruiser, named the Jintsu. The man who had not applied himself the greatest in the Naval Academy was quickly rising throughout the ranks of the Navy. He then became a Rear Admiral in 1940 and was commanding transport divisions as the Second World War broke out. However, he then became the commander of the 6th Base Force at Kwajalein in the Marshall Islands, and because of this position, Abe was serving as a Japanese military governor of the Marshall Islands, as well as Ocean Island, the Gilbert Islands, Nauru, and Wake Island, based in the Central Pacific Ocean. But then one of his most infamous actions would occur. On the 17th and 18th of August 1942, the raid on Makin Island took place, and this was an attack by the US Marine Corps raiders, and the plan was for the US forces to destroy Japanese installations, gain a significant amount of military intelligence, and divert the Japanese to support the defence of Makin in the face of Allied landings on Guadalcanal and Tulagi. The Japanese had created the Makin Atoll garrison, and there was a collection of armed forces. On the 17th of August, the raiders launched in inflatable boats, and they landed on Makin, and the landing was very difficult due to the rough sea and the high surf. The men led by Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson were landed on one beach, rather than the planned two, and the raiders at 7 a.m. led inland, advancing from the beach, and they met strong Japanese resistance in the form of machine guns and also snipers that inflicted casualties. The Japanese also launched banzai charges, which were dealt with, and most of the Japanese based on the island were killed. Later that afternoon, 12 Japanese planes arrived over Makin, and they carried reinforcements, but they were then attacked by the raiders with anti-tank rifles and machine gun fire. The evacuation then began on Makin, but a number of ships were unable to get past the strong surf, and some men were left on the island. A note was then sent to the Japanese commander to offer the surrender, but this messenger was killed by other Americans. Rescue boats were then launched the following day, but one team had even made their own raft, and they managed to sail 4 miles from Makin to escape before they were picked up. But the American raid resulted in 18 deaths on the US side, and 12 listed as missing in action. The US forces had killed between 85 to 160 Japanese soldiers on the island, wiped out the radio station, fuel depot, and other military installations, but 9 Marines who had been left behind were captured by the Japanese. They were then moved to Koso Abe and imprisoned for around a month. Koso Abe was informed about the capture of these men, and the plan was for them to remain locked up. However, because of the attack on Makin and the danger that these forces posed, being highly skilled Marines, a number of other Japanese commanders pressured Koso Abe to execute the prisoners. Each of these American soldiers on the 16th of October 1942 were then executed at the hands of Japanese officers, and each of them were beheaded using sword, which was a harrowing execution method. This was performed often by the Japanese upon captured Allied soldiers, and there are a number of accounts of execution by sword during the war. But following his role in commanding this region, Koso Abe was then made the commander of the Tateyama Naval Gunnery School, and he was involved in training soldiers, and at the end of the war he was a commander of a number of bases. However, the Americans had heard as to what happened to the American soldiers who had been executed by sword at the hands of Koso Abe, and because of this he was a wanted man. He was apprehended at the end of the conflict, and was then brought to a trial and was charged with war crimes. Much of what he was accused of was related to the witness testimony in response to the Makin raid and in ordering the execution of American soldiers who should have been treated as prisoners of war. He was then extradited to Guam to face an American tribunal and was convicted on the 23rd of May 1946 of violation of the law and custom of war and the moral standards of a civilized society. For over a year, Abe was held inside of a jail in Guam on death row, awaiting his execution and his date with the hangman, and on the 19th of June 1947 he was told he was to be executed immediately. He was fetched from his prison cell and was then led into an execution chamber, and his arms and legs were secured as military policemen flanked him. He was then led up the stairs of the gallows, where military policemen then handed him over to the executioner, who placed a black cap over his head, followed by the noose. The execution performed by American Army officials followed a very similar pattern across Europe and Asia. When the checks were completed, Abe was then sent crashing through the trapdoor by the executioner, and minutes later he was confirmed dead. His body was then placed inside of a coffin, and it was taken to a crematoria quickly, and his remains were reduced to ashes, which were never sent to his family. Koso Abe's actions that sent him to the gallows and the executioner at the hands of the American Army was when he ordered the executions of the American soldiers captured following the Makin Island raid. The execution by sword was barbaric and was medieval, and this appalled the US forces, and for this Koso paid for his actions with his life. He rose to the position of Vice Admiral by the end of the Second World War, and was considered an experienced military man and naval officer, and when he was executed he was 55 years old. He had commanded many different ships, but his fatal error was ordering those executions. If he had not done this, then it's probable that he would have faced little action at the hands of the Americans at the end of the war. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you for watching.